Well, here we are at Evolution Hour 17 on September the 20th on the subject of Smorgasbord creationism. There's my fabulous opening logo, which we will get rid of here in just a moment, with a message on the tip patrons that we have. Steve and John and Direwolf and Eatmeal and Mona and Jen and Jody and Staggles and Tot Israel and Paul. I'd like to thank all of you for helping so far on the Patreon side. And there's also the GoFundMe down there for people who think that what I'm doing kind of matters and should be continued because things don't grow on trees. So we're about ready to make our move and get rid of our screen sharing and move on to the world of what it is we were going to be discussing. You're probably all aware that there are lots of anti-evolutionists out there, and you might wonder what kind of flavors they come in. And there we got between the air quotes creationists and the air quotes intelligent design. And it turns out from my studying of the hashtag tip project, where I'm looking at all the sources that people do, that you've got a between these two camps. I see we forgot some people popping up there. We'll have to say hello to Lord Crocosquirrel. What you have historically is an anti-evolutionism that arose in the 19th century as soon as Darwin was on the field. And it generally fed off of the general science framework of the time, so we would now be kind of classifying it as old Earth creationism. By the time you get down to the 1940s and 50s, the new breed of young Earth creationism is coming along that's riffing off of Ellen White's Seventh-day Adventism flood geology. And Henry Morris and the gang that formed the Institute for Creation Research and that branch of creationism kicked into high gear in the 1960s and 70s, and they hit their high water mark in the 1980s in the first phase, when they were actually trying to get legislation in Tennessee and Arkansas and other places that eventually slammed into the Supreme Court that said, no equal time between evolution and creationism. It's a religious doctrine. At that point, the various hangers-on in this began to retool. They didn't like the idea that young Earth creationism was making the field sound ridiculous for the reason that it was ridiculous. So they kind of distanced themselves from it. And the new breed of collegiate intelligent designers, represented by Philip Johnson and what eventually became the Discovery Institute set, started kicking in the 1980s and then into high gear in the 1990s, jump-started by Darwin on Trial by Philip Johnson. And that has basically been the modality down to the present. The old style 1980s debate between young Earth creationism and old Earth creationism was essentially settled. The old Earth creationists are a niche market now. I'll stopping in. Oh, I see Paul is in there. Paulogia. Hello, Paul. Da Idiot says that he had a Morris booklet way back in the 80s in grade school. That's rather interesting. Boy, if you are on video, we'd like you to have to come in and actually discuss that. If they were passing one of those things out in grade school, that would be an example of skirting the lines, even in the educational phrase in the 1980s. Morris has a very long history, and so do the new breeds now that have popped up. Your Ken Ham types with Answers in Genesis that really starts kicking into high gear in the 1990s. Now, what you discover when you start looking at who plays on what field, the young Earth creationist Answers in Genesis ICR types and the Discovery Institute Intelligent Design Gang are really kind of careful about staying on their rock. Young Earth creationists, if you publish in Acts and Facts from Institute for Creation Research, for example, you can bet they are a full-blown young Earth creationist. They're very doctrinally fussy. And if they mention intelligent design or Michael Behe, they'll often as not put in little cautions that Behe's not quite one of us because he accepts the old Earth framework, he accepts the conventional chronology, maybe even accepts speciation, kind of, sort of, and common descent. And so they kind of put little bars around them. Move over to the Discovery Institute, and they're also very fusspotty. They're never going to be linking, at least not overtly, typically, to any young Earth creationist material. Although you do get examples. Denise O'Leary, for example, who's a Canadian intelligent design advocate, has directly linked to good old Jeffrey Tompkins, the young Earth creationist geneticist from the University of Georgia, and even occasionally to his direct young Earth creationist posts that he's come up with. But she doesn't seem to realize that he's kind of a young Earth creationist, which brings us into of the smorgasbord. That if you get down and bump into people on Twitter or in just face-to-face meetings or elsewhere, or a lot of material that's primarily website stuff, you may find somebody who is an anti-evolutionist and an anti-Darwinist, and then you go looking at the sources that they list in their go-to stuff, links. And it's just a vast array of stuff, from Duane Gish, young Earth creationism, to Michael Behe and intelligent design. They'll go to the Discovery Institute, they'll go to Answers in Genesis, they'll have stuff from a wide variety of stuff. Those are the people I call smorgasborders. Ones that are relatively unclear about what they mean, except it's creation or creationism in a generic sense. They may or may not believe in the flood. They may or may not think the Earth is 6,000 years old or any age at all. They may not have thought about it much at all. But they picky-choosy off of the menu that they encounter online, and they pick stuff that are in fact mutually incompatible. And I'll call attention to this in Twitter jousting with people, that if somebody is rely on Duane Gish at the same time they're relying on Michael Behe, I'm sorry, but those two are not compatible systems, because one is a young Earth creationist and the other isn't. And so their time frames, everything is all completely skewed on that. So ideally, when you are bumping into creationists online or elsewhere, you want to scope out where they are on the landscape. Sometimes they'll be self-identifying. They're discussing things. If they bring up the Big Bang as a problem, they aren't riffing really seriously off of intelligent design, and whether they like it or not, they're coming from a young Earth creationist framework. Sometimes you have to deliberately poke and ask, when do you think life appeared on the Earth? How old do you think the human species is? And so forth. And sometimes the very evasiveness, that the inability to answer that question, maybe because they've never thought about it, or they don't want to let you know what they think. But sometimes the sources will be coming up on that. Nobody outside of young Earth creationism ever complains about radiometric dating. Instantaneous litmus test. But the fun ones are the smorgasborders, who just slop around so they can simultaneously talk about Behe's irreducible complexity and the radiometric dating problems in the same breath, because they're riffing off of stuff at that smorgasbord level. And if you can peg somebody as a secondary source addict, intermediate smorgasborder type, you approach them differently than you would somebody who is a doctrinal enthusiast, who basically is steeped sometimes at a technical level on either one of the other camps. So that's the procedure that I think everybody needs to kind of have in mind on that. Now let me look over in the commentaries at the various people over there. The idiot says YouTube talks about jargon, was just arguing information can't create itself, in an unrelated Sean Hufford hangout this afternoon. That wouldn't surprise me. Information is one of those cute commentaries that pops up all the time, and it's riffing largely off of the intelligent design camp, because you've got a bunch of people that kind of play off of that, and they're not necessarily in the young Earth creationist view, although this pops up to some extent there as well. They need to define what they mean by information, and the problem is it doesn't matter how information or genetic systems arise. It can be by miracle. Once they replicate, once they have mutations, they're Darwinian. They can't avoid being Darwinian. And so you're going to have natural selection kick in automatically. And you got to nudge them off of their abstractions to talk about reality. And the reality that you look at, all the genetic information we have is from living organisms for all practical purposes. You can get a little bit of stuff as you move backwards. You can find Neanderthals and mammoths and others that you can get some DNA off of. And the older it is, the less you get. Eventually it drops off the scope and you can't get any information at all. So all the genetic data that we're looking at is from living organisms. And if you can force them to have to at least visibly ignore the fact that every time we look at existing genetic information, it sure as hell looks like natural branching speciation has been the product of it, and we can do more and more in the way of paleogenomics to physically test some of this stuff out. Oh, link please, RJ, on what am I to be linking to? Lord Quackasquirrel asked for a link, and I'm not entirely sure what little bit you're wanting to have a link on. While I'm waiting for that to pop up in the conversation, I'll look at Hayev's. In his experience, creationists generally would much rather attack evolution abiogenesis than discuss any science supporting their position. That's quite true. I call that the origins or bust argument. The hangout. Let me there. Yes, I will go into the winds and think directly here so that anybody can pop in. Mr. Intelligent Design attempts to jump in, I'm going to be bumping him out in a hurry. There we go. The origins or bust, I've done a video or two on that issue. That is the default position that almost all anti-evolutionists end up at some point, because it's the way they avoid talking about all the stuff that's after that. And it's a long time ago. That's another point you want to do in the Smorgasbord issue, is to pin them down on when life originated. Our chicken.
Hey, James.
Hello.
Hello, Master RJ. Give me just a moment here to fix the setting, and I'll be right with you.
Yeah.
There you go. That's better. We're all set now. Haha.
Yeah. Into the general issue of the Smorgasbord phenomenon.
Yep. The Smorgasbord is actually a lot of fun when you think about it, because they do actually cross over quite a bit. And I think everybody does that to some degree or another. The question, of course, is where they came from, and actually intelligent design and young Earth creationism aren't as far separated as some might think.
Oh, methodologically, they're identical. But in terms of their doctrinal position, intelligent design likes to draw a little line around themselves. That no, they are purely sciencey types. They're not using any religious doctrines. They're very, very different. But the problem is, when you look at the average creationist apologetics that Brian Thomas or somebody does over in YEC land, it's the same stuff. They will more directly allude to the religion aspect. So there's really no functional methodological difference. They're all doing authority quotes. They're parsing information. They don't really think through what they think happens. You know, the same shtick. But the Smorgasbord phenomenon is far clearer on people that really don't know what it is they think, but they know something they don't want. They don't want that evolution stuff.
Of course not. Why would they want that?
Yeah.
Because that would take the Bible, crumple it up in a little ball, and toss it out a freaking window.
It's fair to say that, with very, very few exceptions, anti-evolutionists are politically conservative religionists. In the U.S. context, almost exclusively Christian, but you find Jewish ones. David Klinghoffer at the Discovery Institute is Jewish, and Michael Medved and others popping up in that frame. More overt creationism because of its roots in Southern Baptist and a lot of conservative Pentecostals and all of that, and some of the branches of Lutheranism and the Methodists. There are little niche markets. They'll be almost exclusively Christian, very politically conservative.
The flip side of that is you also it doesn't really matter what version of the Abrahamic religions you've got. All three of them ascribe to more or less the same things.
But you've got the branch. I describe them generally as liberal versus conservative. Oh, I'll put a comment in here about hi, Ev, asking whether we're talking about sea design propinquists now. That would, of course, would allude to the notorious case of where the early drafts of a Pandas and People had been talking about creation science, and when they revamped it for air quotes intelligent design, they were doing a cut and paste, but somebody pasted ineptly, and they got the drafts of the intermediates that had the transitional form of where there was an example of the C design propinquists out there, where they had lopped off, they still had the C from creationism and ists from creationists, but they had put in the design proponents as the interpolation. It hadn't been tight on that, and that became a little bit of a cause célèbre at the Dover trial, and I went into some of that in tip 1.7 at tip. So yeah, that's we're
so James, what you're saying is we do have a transitional form.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, there's actually
show them. They always want these transitional forms. Here you go. There's your transitional form.
Absolutely, 130%.
So now we have 8. We now have 8 definitions of evolution.
Yes, we can pull the line. Well, young Earth creationism has gone through several mutation fields, both individually and larger doctrinal. The biggest one that I'm still trying to pin down, and is so far it looks like it was happening in the mid-1990s, is when young Earth creationism went from rejecting plate tectonics, continental drift, to adopting it, kind of, sort of, for post-flood.
Would that be a microevolution, or would that be macro?
Yeah, it's actually of a macro jump for them, because the Henry Morris brands, I know you were going for a joke there, but it's actually a serious point, is what level of jump this was. And that gang were absolutely conceiving of the Earth that the flood happened with as the Earth they grew up on.
Yeah.
About some pre-different landscape.
I'd have to do some looking into this to see when this guy came out. It never really caught on with anybody wanting to make response or reply videos back in the day to this guy. A few people did, but it had to do with expanding Earth. Are you aware what that is?
Yeah, that is a niche. Yeah, I think I've got a few.
Does that ever come into any kind of creationism at all? Because I never hear
much. It pops up a little bit. I think I've got.
Believe it or not, I've seen this argument before. The geocentric hits like this one.
Yeah, it was an idea.
They are, when the flood happened,
Lord, hold on.
Like a big popcorn ball.
Yeah, croc scroll, hold on. It was actually a scientific theory at one point before understanding plate tectonics.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of
continental drift and things like that. But there's some people, like earthers, who like to go back to it.
Well, the geocentrics like to do that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to troll way. In the same way that some of the bits about biogeography bump in earlier works are bumping into the old land bridge rush of the 1880s, where we get Lemuria and that from, with the attempt to try to figure out a way to get taxa on India and Madagascar connected up. And that brings you into Atlantis lore and a whole bunch of stuff. But those all became irrelevant after plate tectonics and modern systematics.
Mm-hmm.
And here's one more for you. The expanding Earth conjecture, for lack of a better term, actually died somewhere near the same time as Sir Isaac Newton. Because it just was, because if you took gravity into account, it really wasn't even possible for that to happen.
Yeah, the current buzzwords in modern young Earth creationism are the fountains of the deep stuff. So Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, and to some extent Kurt Wise, and that maths of blobby vegetation bearing whole ecosystems around in the post-flood world until they land and plop them all down and turn into things. Needless to say, they don't get terribly detailed on that stuff, but it's fun to kind of watch them scavenge around for it. The current versions that I've seen from the pictures of the Creation Museum there in Kentucky, which I've only seen from afar, suggest that they believe that the Rhodinian supercontinent was the one that existed at the time of the flood, and then it turned into Pangea really uber quick. Yeah, I'm not making this up. And then it turned into Pangea in the which then settled into our present one.
Yeah, okay. I'll buy that for $1. Anyway, back to the Dover trial for
It's
2
a laugher.
seconds.
Yeah.
I find it interesting with Judge Jones, the super conservative Christian of the George Bush era, or the George II era, I should say. I didn't see a whole lot of difference between creationism and intelligent design, and in fact, his argument at the end was that they were not in fact different, but were evolution. Intelligent design was a rapid evolution of creation science, and
yeah, I covered a lot
die
of that
appropriately.
Yeah, I covered a lot of the side issues there on that in tip 1.7. I'll plug my website. We just had a wonderful set of conversations going on in the live chat about moon dust. And I think I've got the source references on it in the old introduction or chapter 1. It was one of the two of them in my old book on the lunar dust myth. That popped up because I was referring to the Texas Gablers, and they were repeating this little claim about the lunar dust. That was one of those little canards that you don't see a heck of a lot of in modern creationist apologetics because it's really stupidly wrong. And it was claiming that there should have been a massive amount of lunar dust on the moon if it were billions of years old because of the accumulation rate. And it turns out it was based on taking the upper limit of the kinds of stuff that they were looking at from mountain tops, but those were actually concentrating stuff. And later on, they got much better space-based measurements of how much lunar dust is floating around in space. And they were able to work it out that they were expecting just exactly the amount of lunar dust that they actually encountered. I think there was one scientist who was still kind of hoping that there was going to be big masses of it on the moon when they landed, but he was in a minority by that time. So that's one of those things that if anybody brings up the lunar dust myth and paying attention to modern creationist apologetics, and they're riffing off of probably older material, and that's telling you about them. They may be somebody who's an old fart like me, and they read some creationism back in the 60s and 70s, and it just stuck in their brain like a little burr, and it's never left, and they never bothered to check on it since. Yeah, that was a good one. Anyway, back to the exciting world of Dover case. The neat thing with that was that both sides on the dispute were asking pointedly for Judge Jones to rule on the science of intelligent design. And after he ruled, the intelligent designers, needless to say, didn't like it because he said, no, it's pseudoscience. It's not legitimate science. And they've been having conniption fits about it ever since. The fact, too, that a lot of the protagonists in the case were lying under oath, judge, and the whole issue of how they were pushing this claptrap book. I know from the reptile-mammal transition part of it that Pandas and People is just claptrap. It's junk. It's got the wrong pictures. They don't understand the material. Some of the mistakes had to be slightly corrected when Dembski and Wells revamped the book, but they still kept the mistakey parts. And so it's just terrible. And there's no, you can't get, still you find creationists that are pushing Pandas and People as a legitimate work because their brains congealed back in 1990.
RJ, if I might interject here for just a moment.
Yes, do indeed.
If anybody other than Behe and perhaps Dembski understood any of the material, they wouldn't have a book, like at all. There wouldn't be a book.
There's some interesting gangs floating around in that bunch. I mean, you've got people like Gager and Douglas Axe, and that are actually trying to do sciencey stuff. They're the equivalent of the baraminologists over in Young Earth Creationism. They actually publish papers. I don't know if you've seen them in the Biocomplexity Journal the intelligent designers run. And it's fun to read and fun to analyze, and I'm going to eventually be source analyzing every single bloody one of them because they're revealing things about their method. The one that most from Gager and Axe is when they were taking a biological system where they were retrocalculating out of steps it would take to go from the one on the one side to the one on the other side, and apparently it takes more than 2 steps, and therefore, ta-da! Well, what they needed to do theoretically, what would a common ancestor need to be, and how many would any of the intermediate steps be functional? And we know from the bacterial resistance genes and all that kind of stuff that pop up that we can see literally step by step by step how the transitional processes work and how they're functional at all stages. So that's the zone that whenever they try to make this argument, you want to try to look at it to avoid looking at that phylogenetic relationship.
Type 3 secretory system.
Yeah, that's another fun one. The root of the flagellum. And here's where you have to tread very carefully, though, because the interesting thing about the type, there's a whole slew, at least 6 systems that are described, cleverly called type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5, and type 6. So scientists can be so imaginative at times. But anyway, the type 3 system is the one that's connected up to the flagellum. And what is interesting about it is it looks like all existing organisms that use a type 3 apparently got it from the flagellum system. And so intelligent designers will leap in and simultaneously acknowledge rampant and and then at the same time fail to think through the whole point is the ancestor system of a flagellum doing. And it was probably doing kind of what a type 3 system does, but the specific version that we know about is obtained by lateral gene transfer from these bacteria. There's a lot of interesting components going on. The one thing I pointed out in the old Light chapter in TIP, he was that he always overstated the case, overdid how much was known about the systems. And that's still true today. We're just now starting to figure out a bit more about the motor proteins that turn the flagellum and where they're coming from. They've now found the homologies on those, which we didn't know earlier. The interesting one still is the damn cap. For those of you who don't understand the fiddly bit details, what you've got is a central shaft that acts as a type 3 secretion system that pumps out flagellin. And flagellin automatically into little filaments all on its own. What's interesting about the flagellum that the bacteria use is they've got a little cap on the end of it that allows that process to go on organized under low concentrations of flagellum. Then there's also these molecules, the motor proteins, that are arranged, cleverly called mote A and mote B, that are arranged around the edges of this cylinder that allow it to spin. They're the ones that produce the rotor effect. And it's as the flagellum forms, it gets longer and longer. I believe it's constructed from the base up, but my memory is going on that one. But the thing is it's not yet known the fiddly details of how that cap developed. And so that's an interesting evolutionary issue. We have to remember, too, that virtually nobody in the design movement does flagellum research other than Scott Minnick, point guy here. And he's a minor player. He's been, yeah, jump in.
Although Michael Behe certainly did his best to try and defend it in Dover.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was his. Well, actually, he didn't even originate the idea. No. He got his stuff from Michael Denton. Yep. Even down to the picture in his book was lifted from Michael Denton's Evolution: A Theory in Crisis from 1985.
I've read them both.
Have you read Denton's new book?
I have not read Denton's new book. I should do that if I can find a copy.
Yeah, somewhere. I had to get it. Wait till it gets to the library, or better yet, buy my book, because I go into him in great detail on a whole bunch of stuff from the new material. I knew I had to cover him because he mentions the reptile-mammal transition again, and so I got, thanks to Glenn Branch at the NCSE, they bought a copy and shipped it to me because I couldn't afford to get one, and then I went through and got all my material. I was in the process of writing Slam Dunk at the time, and then I shipped it back to them after I was through to leave in their archives, because they hadn't really planned on picking it up. But it's up at the top of the food chain. He's also relevant because Denton is not religious. He's apparently an agnostic. So he doesn't fall in the usual religious canards. But if you look at his method, the same problems that you see in anti-evolutionism generally. He relies at critical junctures on secondary sources. He doesn't read closely the sources he does cite. And he's stepping around issues. He never really defines what the hell he thinks happened. That's the map of time problem. And he never defines what it is that would cause him to change his mind. So he's tripping over the same things that somebody over in Creation Science Land does.
Well, I tend to refer to that as Ken Ham disease.
Well, I just used my word Tortucan. It's a Tortucan phenomenon. It allows you not to attribute aspects, because you can have religious and atheistic Tortucans, you could have politically conservative, politically liberal Tortucans, you can have bright Tortucans and stupid ones. It's merely the ability to not think about things you don't want to think about. And that, I believe, is a what I'll call Matthew Harrison Brady syndrome, in honor of the character from Inherit the Wind, but it was based on a statement Brian had made in the Scopes trial. And that, I think, is the common attribute of everybody who believes things that aren't true. They're at some point not going to think about something. And if you ask them a question that relates directly, Tearspell jumps in, what would change your mind example? Oh, yeah, I discussed that in a lot of different ways. In relation to flood geology, had the world really looked the way you would expect a flood to look, where you would have mass graveyards virtually everywhere, there would be no substantive sorting except the tiny hydrological that they would be talking about. You'd have fragments of things, but also tons of stuff that would be fabulously well preserved. You'd be able to radiocarbon date everything. You'd have the biogeography of animals and their distribution. The relationship of languages would make sense because of Tower of Babel. All of those things would. The fact that that hasn't happened is a major factor. Asking about what would change my mind on evolution now is at the same stage as what would change my mind on gravity. Well, you'd have to get rid of all the evidence that suggests there's gravity.
Fossil bunnies in the Precambrian.
Well, yeah, bunnies in the Precambrian would do it. Theoretically, and I pointed this out in Creationism Light, the one area in intelligent design that theoretically has legs around is the notion of irreducible complexity. That theoretically, if you could really work out a biological system where you know every single jot and tittle, and it's physically impossible to get from system A to system B by point mutation, step by step, functional all the ways, then you could theoretically say, yep, that's something that's truly irreducibly complex. None of the things that he laid down as gauntlets, however, really fulfill that. And what he has to do, he had to do this in the 96 book, Darwin's Black Box, is he had to leave pieces out. And I went through and found in every single instance of all 5 of his examples, buried down in the back of the text and in the footnotes, were the caveats. Well, we don't really know how that works, and we don't know that yet. We don't know about that yet. And yet he's expecting evolution to explain it all when we don't know all the pieces. That was true of the flagellum. It was true of the immune system. It was true of the cellular transport. And in his own backhanded way, he understood that, but he had that Tortucan mindset. He doesn't think about things he doesn't want to think about, and just pressed beyond it. And it stayed the same all the way down to the present. I went into a bit of it in tip 1.7. And let me put the damn website up here again. If you're not looking at my website, shame on you. Won't do a damn bit of good if you're not using the work. Stuff is free there. What more can I do? Anyway, you'll find in tip 1.7, and there's also, I haven't linked to it anywhere because it's kind of a training wheel website. We were trying to find out HTML versions, and it wasn't easy to generate them. But the various modules of the new things, tip 1.1 to 1.7, are available at the other website as well for those of you who can't stand PDFs at the main website. Everything else is a PDF. Anyway, research was an example that Behe had brought up. It's an antibacterial that was starting to have resistance, and he mentioned it in the Dover trial. Michael Behe did, and what fascinated me was what he didn't do later. Followed up on his own argument. I mean, here he lays down this gauntlet and cites a single paper on it, and then he cites it again as though the world had not moved when he did his new book, the second one that he did, The Edge of Evolution. And so what I did was investigate the details. Turns out, whoa, boy, was he leaving stuff out. And then when I went and did Slam Dunk, which of course you have to buy for that because it's not free, that's the starving writer is attempting to survive, and into the chloroquine case, which is the big argument that he makes in Edge of Evolution, where basically he tries to edge out specifically the reptile-mammal transition. He dismisses it without discussing any of it or citing anything on it at all. That they would have required oodles of these point mutations that can't occur because they are impossible, as evidenced by the mutation problem of the chloroquine resistance in the malaria case.
Mm-hmm.
Into that with a vengeance. And it turns out not only was he not reading the content of the paper he was citing, but he wasn't paying any diddly squat attention to what happened afterwards. And in fact, he stumbled right past a fabulously relevant work where even then work had actually worked out, not one, not two, but a bunch of different ways that that resistance could have developed, and obviously did develop, by point mutations from transitional intermediates, all of which are known in living systems.
Yep.
I mean, whoa. And yet he couldn't get past, he just would repeat the mantra. And others at the Discovery Institute would repeat him repeating the mantra. And it's a fascinating phenomenon to go into. Plus, I learned a hell of a lot about cellular transport systems. It actually learned about the actual things that's going on inside of the cell that causes it to be resistant. And therefore, there's this trade-off between gumming up its own cellular transport and keeping the bacterial, the chloroquine stuff out. And it turns out that evolution can predict work based upon which selection pressure was in place. And he didn't know about that either because he had never followed up on it. So it was just a terrible example that illustrated the complete scientific uselessness of intelligent design, usefulness of natural branching, speciation, natural selection, Darwinian evolution. And you learn stuff.
I have a silly question. Isn't Behe a microbiologist?
No, he's a biochemist. He often gets mislabeled. He's a biochemist. So is Dwayne Gish. There's an awful lot of biochemists knocking around in there.
So how does he not know about these things?
Because he is a Tortugan, and he doesn't pay attention to things he doesn't pay attention to. He's not very curious. Over and over again, that you see. If you look at it at the primary source level, and that's why I'm trying to get everybody on the playing field of primary source methods. When you not only learn what the primary source says, but you see how the person that you're criticizing deals with that source or not. And in the case of Behe, he would cite a technical paper and repeat his mantra that was blown to smithereens by the paper he had just cited. Why does he not steal?
Luskin does the same thing.
Well, who's the name?
Luskin.
What's the name again?
Luskin, Casey.
Oh, good old Casey. He's the Dwayne Gish of intelligent design. He is a fascinating little character. Do you know that 14% of the entire intelligent design literature is just Luskin?
Yeah.
It's a lot. He was just vomitously prolific. He's now dropped off the map because he's left the Discovery Institute and I guess to do homeschooling education material for that submarket. And what he's doing now in the last couple of years, I have no idea directly. I don't expect him to disappear, and I certainly don't expect him to change his mind on his viewpoints. He'll be stuck with that. But he was basically the paleontologist.
In my opinion, somebody needs to break Casey's fingers and take away his computers.
Oh, no, I'm much more vicious. I say, let's look at his sources. And it's far worse than finger breaking. This is one where, in fact, he came up in Slam Dunk because Michael Denton had wanted to dismiss feathered theropods as a problem for his argument that feathers can't have evolved by a natural system. And the fact that they had found all these feathered dinosaurs is a little bit of a snag. So he had exactly two sources for his argument. One of them was a Wikipedia article be doing a grade school term paper here. But ironically, the Wikipedia post had actually cited a lot of the technical literature in its notes, so he was missing even that. But his primary gun, his sole source, the reality of feathered theropods, the argument that they were actually just flightless birds, was, drumroll, Casey Luskin, one of his little posts at Evolution News. And it was particularly funny because I was able to get the primary technical paper that Luskin was riffing off of, and it turns out he misrepresented its contents. It didn't say what he claimed it did. He had quote mined the last sentence and removed a qualifier, and oh, it was just hilarious because it was the opposite of what he was trying to claim. And so I used it as a big case in point. I had to discuss feather evolution because as much as I wanted to focus fully on the reptile-mammal transition regarding Denton, Denton had only done that as a minor side issue, star witnesses, and feather evolution was. But yeah, jump in.
No, I just offhand comment. Keep going.
Oh, the thing about the feather evolution was that the genetic mechanisms underlying the formation of feathers are the same that form hair. And they're all involving BMP and sonic hedgehog. They're all involving the archosaur integument placodes. And so the same mechanism as to which burbles in one direction eventually to form hair in mammals and feathers in birds, it's the same dynamics. So the very same work that was popping up and what was revealing was the Wikipedia article had mentioned Alibardi's stuff, was one of the major players in working out all the genetics and the developmental biology of both feather and hair evolution. So the Wikipedia article Denton had cited to Alibardi's work, and yet it never percolated up to Denton's consciousness when he was trying to discuss this issue. He was just riffing off of older material and he was whittling everything down as much as possible. Plus, we have actually found the transitional form feathers preserved in amber. And in fact, it's physically confirming these predicted transitional form proto-feathers that Prum and Brush, Richard Prum and, I forgot the name of it, Alan Brush, I think, had been working on for years, and of which Denton was bouncing very gingerly off the edge of, sorely under-argued evolution, still a theory in crisis. So there's a plug for Evolution Slam Dunk. If everybody gets that book, you'll read exactly what's wrong with Denton on the feather evolution, on the reptile-mammal transition, on the formation of maple leaf shape, and there was another example that he popped up with that I covered as well. Ants. Yes, the whole bunch on ant evolution, which illustrated the various levels of evasion that Denton uses. And Denton is food chain at the Discovery Institute. His stuff is very technically documented. It's not offering a religious argument. He's an agnostic, so he's operating at the pure quintessential intelligent design apologetic, and he's falling apart at every stage the moment you look at his primary sources. Let me look over here on our side comments to see someone is asking if a big effing asteroid can wipe us out, please. Not before I get to enjoy my posthumous fame while I'm still alive. I'm still working on that. Pheno asks,
that's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah, I'm not hopeful at the moment. Anyway, Pheno asks, Brian Stevens, did you talk to Edgar? Edgar is Mr. Intelligent Design, a person that if you really hate somebody, you will recommend that they talk to Edgar.
Speaking of Mr. Intelligent Design, he has said something somewhere. It's a bit rumored. I don't have much detail on it. That he will be debating Kent Hovind.
Oh, he did. Yes, he did.
He either will be or has.
I put the link up on it. He had a 50-minute discussion. I had to put it on. I just got the link on it today. Boy, that's going to be fun to see one idiot discussing something with another idiot.
Well, no, Kent Hovind has a script on how to argue, and then of course the
Mr.
other
Intelligent
Design. So he knows which script to go get for that. And then, of course, it's all problem, solution, discovery, dropping eggs and stuff. And now
Yeah, I had
Your
to put a
script is
bookmark on it.
useless. 200
50
PowerPoint slides get chucked out the window.
Yeah,
200 PowerPoint slides to Kent Hovind, because quite frankly, Kent is so thoroughly predictable at this point that there is.
Yes,
yeah.
but look,
Yeah,
you got to understand, as soon as Edgar starts arguing, those 200 PowerPoint slides are useless.
Hovind and Edgar are different branches of Tortuga Nutball. Hovind is a secondary redactor. He has always been a secondary redactor. I don't think he's had an original thought in his entire life. He has sucked up the creationism essentially of the 1960s and 70s, and it congealed like an oil slick drying in the sun. And it stayed there. And very, very little of his notions are very different from that. He once in a while will allude to more recent material, but it's very, very slim. And remember, he's a talker, not a writer.
Yes.
As we the evidence from his original PhD thesis and the somewhat slicker presentation of the next one, which I found very entertaining indeed.
Edgar, did he start the second one by saying, "Hello, my name is Dr. Ken Hovind"?
Perhaps.
No,
Edgar, by contrast, classic crank. He's one of these guys that discovers the great secret of the universe. It's all, and they get the true thing, and they're the sorts that would be putting out little mimeograph sheets in the 1920s that are all caps. That's Edgar, but he's had a different frame, and he's actually operating at a much more trivial level than Kent Hovind. Kent is actually trying to bump into issues about geological formation and radiometric dating and evolutionary phylogeny. He's got his head up his ass completely on every single one of them, but he's trying to kind of engage with that stuff for his particular purposes. But Edgar is nowhere near that. He's got his egg dropping, and that's it. And this is the great universal truth that he gets as his epiphany. So,
but I will give Mr. Intelligent Design this. Of all the nutballs we've met on the internet, he has an experiment, he has a data set, and it is repeatable.
And he's sweet.
Okay?
Smiling,
he's serious, he puts on a suit and tie, he's got his presentation with his PowerPoint, he doesn't swear at anybody or call names.
Yeah. And the other difference is that an Edgar is never going to affect anybody. Anybody that bumps into Edgar is going to go, oh my, their life. Where Kent Hovind is inadvertently and advertently extremely influential, even though he's regarded as kind of a nutball even by regular young earth creationists. He has a huge following, and in everyday I bump into Kent Hovindistas way more than I ever bump into somebody who has read Michael Behe.
Before his issue with the government and the taxes, because please, come on, that was God's money. God just wanted him to hold on to his bank account. But, you know, God doesn't have good credit, can't get an account. But where was his
and
popularity?
God won't Twitter either. I really am disappointed.
Was he going down, or was he maintaining and going up before he?
He's always been skating on the edge of financial ruin. That was true, but he was also, and given this, Hovind is a dedicated evangelist. He would be funneling. The reason why he was cheating his people and getting as much of them as possible to not actually have their withholding tax paid was so he could funnel his money into his ego trip tours around the country, and he had a fantastically busy a lecture schedule constantly, and building his little mini theme park.
Those were donations.
Oh, I know. Well, that's the subculture. I wish I could get donations anywhere near as vast as any of these little people. Hint, hint. GoFundMe, Patreon.
Did not know that they were donating money.
But anyway, here's the thing, James. If we could actually turn you into half the orator that Kent is, and put a tenth as much conviction behind what you're saying, then
I'm an old desiccated geek. and I'm never going to be anything other than that. I'm a didactic explainer and all the rest. And so and at the moment I don't even have a good haircut. I look like a frazzled wreck. The case is, yeah, Kent has a well-honed frame. If you look at your Holy Roller style preacher, Kent falls in within that background. It's completely effective within that frame. And I don't know whether you're old enough to have seen his really old videos that he did like in the 80s and 90s.
Yes, I've seen them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was what
Believe
I
me,
first
if
bumped
you
into him. See, I was introduced to Kent by my brother, who is also a not creationist, and one of his friends had seen a Kent Hovind tape and had one, and so he loaned it to me, and I made an analysis of it and physically wrote to Hovind asking some questions about stuff. And that's, I allude to that in the Dynamania chapter in the old tip, where I discussed his discussion of the shrinking sun and the fact that Hovind clearly could not do long division, that some really rudimentary mistakes were happening there. And once you get a grip, style, and how he approaches stuff, and the appeal that it has for his audiences, you can see why this stuff is very, very effective. If you have a mind that doesn't fact check anything, he's going to sound very, very persuasive. And I've seen people come up to me where they'll, I was at a booth we had at one of our local street fairs, and this young kid who was graduated from the same high school that I had done years earlier, and he was saying, "Oh, there is science for this. Have you heard of Dr. Kent Hovind?" And I had to keep myself from rolling over in complete hysterics as I began to explain, "Oh, golly gosh, young whippersnapper, boy, do I know about," air quotes, "Dr. Kent Hovind." But he has enormous influence. Remember the chick pamphlets, the Big Daddy pamphlet that still circulates. I see creationists to this day fielding the chick pamphlet online on Twitter. Where did Chick get his stuff from? He got it from Kent Hovind. That a lot of the people that were in the Dover case were watching Kent Hovind videos. A lot of them had read some of the stuff, the Joe Baker case that I mentioned, where see, people need to read my crap. The Joe Baker case of a young Earth creationist that the Discovery Institute was fawning over around 2000, including Philip Johnson and Michael Behe and Jonathan Wells. They were all just oozing over him. He's a Hovindista. And he's now running like a Christian T-shirt company down in Florida, I think. But he's still doing little evangelical hiking trips and stuff for the cause. But he's still a Hovindista. So there are millions, I would guesstimate, of people whose view of evolution has been steeped in what they have heard. And so he is influential in a way little Edgar is never, ever, ever going to be.
I don't think Edgar would know what to do with himself if he was that influential, if we're being completely honest.
And he never will be. I mean, he said he's just a crank in that thing, and that's one of the reasons why you want to taxonomize people according to their influence. One of the things that's fascinating about Institute and their branch is the actual minority status they have in anti-evolutionism. And that brings us to the original topic of the Smorgasbord. It's that their notions filter into the frame, but the frame it filters into is a young Earth creationist frame. That they are the dominant anti-evolutionists in the thing. They have great more influence on things. And even, I'll tell you this, geocentrists have more influence than they'll ever have. Because we have to remember that the Ellwanger, who was the Roman Catholic geocentrist who actually wrote all those equal time legislation prototypes that were put in as Tennessee and Arkansas and all that hit the Supreme Court, he was a geocentrist, still is, as far as I know. And then they're over in Malcolm Bowden, who is a British geocentrist. He was the guy whose arguments on human evolution first persuaded Philip Johnson, the intelligent design guy, to be skeptical of Peking Man and Java Man. Dawned on him to check the fact that Bowden also thinks the Earth doesn't revolve around the sun. And the fellow that actually wrote, Tom Willis, the guy that actually wrote the Kansas anti-evolution standards in 1999, doesn't think the Earth revolving around the sun is a settled scientific issue. Actually have had an influence on the way things go in that creation evolution debate in a way little nitwit Edgar is never, ever, ever going to do. He's just small potatoes.
I think you've actually just insulted small potatoes everywhere.
Well, yes, I apologize to potatoes, big and small, of all varieties and forms, all tubers generally, and in fact, all metazoans and organisms with mitochondria. I'm apologizing. We're dealing with that. Yeah, we're getting some side comments on the old Chick pamphlets. Pheno notes, yeah, Jack Chick was a bigot, but did never hide it, like with his Catholics or satanic stuff. Yeah, that's one of the nasty streaks of that branch, because you have to remember that a lot of the core of anti-evolutionism is hyper-Protestant, and which makes it weird when you do find Catholics. When you move over into intelligent design land, you have an awful lot of Roman Catholics involved. Michael Behe's a Roman Catholic, and a lot of the hangers-on that support that branch, Pat Buchanan, the late William Buckley, and so that kind of anti-Catholicism that operates in niche markets in young earth creationism doesn't play a role at all in the little kumbaya insular collegiate world that is Discovery Institute Intelligent Design. They have an international, they've just had a bunch of intelligent design bunch down in Brazil and connecting up, and they link up with ones in England and various other places. Beckley, who is their now in-house paleontologist who finally shot his mouth off on something at the Discovery Institute at Evolution News and Views. Finally, I'm getting a view of his opinions, and they're pretty thin. Is German insect paleontologist who will see whether or not he can manage to sustain his vague arguments and yet keep anything like a reputation in the systematics fields or not. We'll find out about that. An ongoing field. We're nearing the end of the hour. So I should probably wrap up as to if there are any questions or comments or issues that people want to end up with before we end up in here. We've got the crocodile squirrel, rooster, and then people in the online comments on there. Fire away.
No, I don't. I think I'm actually kind of out. I'm actually out of questions. I'd really like to see that that debate between Kent Hovind and Edgar, because really, honestly, it's the one time. It's the one time I think I actually want to see Kent win.
If I can hunt up, we'll probably run a snittle over the time. Let me see if I can find the link. Bookmarked it, and I accidentally closed off too many sheets, which often happens when I'm cutting things down, because I go off of Twitter and all that to cut down. I close down stuff. Where do Kent Hovind? Okay, I'm pulling his thing up, and I will be putting the link up here in the room and also on the live chat, so everybody can follow that. And so here is the link in that section. And I'll put it in over here. As I recall, it's 56 minutes long. I think every student of method will find it rather interesting, because you've got two people who, between the two of them, have nothing but incompetence. You should be able to have a good sense how the method plays out. And what you can see is what subjects come up and what ones don't, and reacts to somebody who is impervious to material. Hayab is asking me if I've seen Logic's video and Kent Hovind's videos. No, I haven't. I must confess, and this is a weird thing to say for somebody doing something on video, I watch a lot of videos. They have a relatively low information content. They have source references alluded to directly in them or linked to them in their descriptions. Often there's not a great deal there, and that's I pointed this out before. It's true even for like a Nova show or science material that comes from the BBC, that they're in an hour of program, which are 45 minutes or 50 minutes nowadays with all of the commercial padding and that. If they've got a few technical material issues that I wasn't already aware of along the way, that's kind of a busy show. But nevertheless, you can find information that way. But it's a slow way. If you have a video that runs an hour or 2 hours, how much time do you have to go plowing through it all to be able to get down to the meat? Different structure that you get at in a print medium where you can zap down and see, ooh, now that looks interesting, and follow that way. So I'm acting as a hypocrite here. The videos aren't necessarily terribly useful. And hopefully my discussions are at least useful. I try to put in, this one is an exception because I'm talking very generic about the smorgasbord concept. But in all my other videos that I put up where I am discussing points of issue, I've always tried to put direct links into the place so that anybody watching it can follow up on their own. Because I don't want anybody to take my word for anything. Even though I have oracular precision and accuracy, nonetheless, I don't want anybody to rely on me as some, because you shouldn't have to. You should be able to find the information yourself. You should be able to build your own argument. But videos or any other medium that we use can allow people to save themselves legwork to where they can pick up the trail and not have to reinvent the wheel every single time. They don't have to research every damn thing on their own because that's laborious. It's time consuming. And I've already been trying to help. I know Pelagia. Hi, Pelagia. Pelagia has drawn on my work as fact checking. And he asked me material. Jackson Wheat has been jump started because he would be looking into a particular point, and I already knew the background of it, so I was able to speed him up on that. That's the kind of network I want to see us forming. Thousands, tens of thousands of people all over the place who have a huge amount of expertise, and too much of it's disconnected. Able to bring everybody together in some kind of networking method. I find Twitter really useful format, and I've got my people that I follow on there that act as like spider tendrils. And then also there's people that are on the Great Debate community that I get their emails on there. I don't necessarily need to see the debate, but they will be referring to technical issues, and if they've got a link that I can follow up on, boop, I can get caught up on that, feed it into my system, and get ahead of the game on that. Tim is asking, I've been out of the loop for a bit. Did you finish your debate with that anesthetist, RJ? No, he never came back. Strike tried to set up a round 2, and it hasn't shown up yet. Not knowing what they were talking about, I debated a Mark Huffman, who is a young earth creationist. The debate format was to have a lot of questions and answers, and he needed to put his kid away, so we never really got to a discussion part. We were both answering fixed questions initially, and that's not my forte. I much prefer to have a conversation. But I did finally get in, was asking him, did he ever fact check his sources? And he got this deer in the headlight look, where, no, on Tortugan alert, that's your problem. Is you never fact check your sources. And that's one of the core problems that everybody who believes things that are really not true is snagging up on that. They are addicted to secondary sources. They listen to the guru, and that's why I don't want anybody listening to me to treat me that way. That you should be able to demand of me sources. You should be able to poke holes in my argument if you can. I should be able to defend my arguments at any point. And on Twitter, where I am at RJ Downard on Twitter, by all means, pick my damn brain. If you have a question about some material or some dispute about material, tweet me. I respond to all tweets. I check all of that. Now I've finally gotten kind of more of the hang works, where the notifications and all of that, and I do Twitter jousts with people. I'm always polite, I hope. It was kind of funny because I got blocked. I got for a while there. I was suddenly locked out. I don't know the circumstances of it, but I had to email because I don't have a damn phone. I can't afford that. So they couldn't send me the confirmation code, and so I had to go through the email route. But it actually only took them a day because I got a very circumspect letter back from them saying they have evaluated my case and they apologize for this, and you are back online and everything is all fine. So what I suspect is somebody, and I can think of several examples online, decided they were going to report me supposedly for violating routines, and the problem is I don't. I see no reason why I can't follow somebody who I regard as an idiot and comments like I do with Dinesh D'Souza. And as I pointed out with Dinesh D'Souza, If he wants to block me, he can. He could just, with a click.
See, Dinesh actually has a bad habit of reporting people.
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me. I regard him as a sanctimonious prick, and that's on his good sides.
Well,
He is, and I've been making a point because he's a terrible scholar. Already done quite a few videos on these issues, where whenever he bumps into material, and my favorite one was the one where Dinesh gave an excerpt from his new book, The Big Lie. We're running over, but I don't care. He had a thing on The Big Lie, which is his attempt to show that liberals and leftists are actually the root of all evil, and the Nazis and all these others, and they aren't really right-wing. Godless is asking, is he talking about the real Dinesh D'Souza? And yep, I'm talking about the real Dinesh D'Souza. A charming sounding, except his tweets are nasty, vitriolic. But he sounds scholarly. He popped up on my scope when his book, What's So Great About Christianity, or Why is Christianity So Great? It's some title like that. I think it's from 2006 or 7. And on the back cover was a little comment by, of all people, Michael Shermer, who said that he disagreed with his conclusions, but he admired his scholarship. Boy, he must not have fact-checked him. Because I didn't admire his scholarship. And in that book, full routine defending the Spanish Inquisition that was based on a single source that he obviously hadn't read. Exactly the opposite of what he said it did. And so that really piqued my curiosity on Dinesh. Well, anyway, he gets down to this new Big Lie book that he's been hawking all over the place, and he will preen when anybody says, oh, I bought your book and it's so wonderful and all that. Needless to say, I haven't had too many people do that with my book, so I'm jealous in that respect. But anyway, Dinesh put a excerpt apparently from it up on Breitbart, that notorious, delicious little site of Culture Camp pseudoscience and dogma. And so I was able now to look at that work. And it had like 6 references, of which 2 of them were to things that were not true. He quoted a non-existent Sanger quote that he got secondarily from Richard Weichert's book, which I knew about because I had it in my library. So all I had to do was go downstairs, pull it up, and look it up, and found out Weichert had got it secondarily as well. And when I did research on it, I discovered that, nope, Sanger had not actually said that at all. It was from somebody else criticizing Sanger, and Sanger explicitly repudiated the point that was being raised. It was about basically whether Sanger was supposedly wanting rich people to breed a lot in this eugenics concept, which that was the context of the quote, and it was not her position. And then the other one that was the real gem was his note number 3 on this book by Popenoe and Johnson from 1918 on applied eugenics. And he was claiming that Popenoe and company were recommending using lethal chambers on the defective, and that this was the inevitable thing that the Nazis were following off on. Well, to my delight, I discovered that the whole book was available free at Gutenberg, Project Gutenberg, where they archive an awful lot of works. And so I was able to download the whole bloody thing and do a complete search on it. And it turns out not only had Dinesh got the page number wrong, but he actually had brought up the subject of lethal chamber, singular, not plural. It was about why castration was a bad idea because it was irreversible and didn't seem to do any good. The same thing can be said about lethal chambers, gas chambers for executing criminals. It's effective in a technical sense, but there's so much against it that nobody is using it as an argument. So they were literally recommending the opposite of what Dinesh claimed they were. There were a couple trolls who tried to actually defend this argument, but boy, as soon as you started actually looking at the primary source, and I keep on linking to it so everybody can go look on themselves, they don't have to worry about it. So I don't have to guess that repeatedly Dinesh either will rely on secondary sources he doesn't fact check, or cites a primary source that he obviously hasn't read, and or he got it from somebody else secondarily. That would explain why the page number was wrong. But I haven't been able to track that down well enough on there. So do I have any respect for Dinesh D'Souza as a scholar? No. And because he is trying to make hay in attacking everybody in those liberals, and he despises Hillary Clinton and Obama and all of the Democratic Party and all of that stuff, and goes on and on and on and on about it, and can never be quite dragged to say anything unpleasant about Trump. discuss his narcissism. He won't discuss his lies on the voter fraud claim or anything else. He just shies away from that in a hurry, and I can just see the Tortugan alert popping up on the fellow. Whether or not it ever reaches the point where he has to pay attention to all of this stuff, I don't know. But so long as I have money to pay the internet and food to survive and stuff to continue on the projects, I'm going to keep at it as long as I can, gang. Oh, Fino says, RJ drop as a scholar. Dinesh does not deserve any respect. I agree. Jackson
because,
Wheat.
Honestly,
yeah, jump in.
RJ, Dinesh D'Souza can't, in fact, go actually look over his primary sources when he care. You'd have to be capable of reading first.
Yeah, and that's what bothers me about him, because he has this patina of scholarship about him. He has this professorial air that sounds wonderful, but the proof is in the pudding. And the moment you start looking at sources, to find a random sampling, of which 1/3 of them right off the bat are false, and I was able to look up those as well. It was clearly the case that he was pulling stuff out of context and therefore quote mining, which is the problem that you get into with creationism. So methodologically, he has the same methodological approach as creationists do. He originally popped up too because he had lambasted a little bit about evolution, but he's not really an intelligent designer. He hasn't really thought any of this stuff through very well on that. He also pops up in climate change because he's a climate change denier and relies on an old nitwit from the Heartland Institute that had been debunked even by business people at the time. So, I mean, he's just terrible whatsoever on this. And for somebody to be preening about it, and so what I've taken to do on Twitter, he retweets somebody praising that they just got his book. One was even recommending that the president needs to read your book. And I go, well, so long as they fact check it, because Dinesh is an incompetent scholar, and see if they take the bait on that. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them jump to conclusions. I've been accused of being a Marxist by one guy, this guy, Alex Zane, and it was fun because he made the mistake of playing on my turf, because he started posting stuff at Tip forever for everybody to see forever, because it ain't going anywhere. I'm not deleting anything. And also some of my videos, the video I did on the Sanger Popino case with Jackson, he weighed in on that. So all those quotes like venue, and I don't know that you have a right to be able to delete your own material, but I know he can't delete any of the stuff on my site. So he's there, and you can just see what a tendentious git this guy is. Insulting, superficial, just repeats the same mantras over and over again. And so what I then did, I'm not trying to persuade him to change his mind. That's not possible. Instead, I'm using the discussion as a venue to bring up more science data and more historical data. And so that every time he wants to get in the last word, I'm going to get in my last word, and I'm going to be talking about something. And it's going to be meaningful. He even tried to bring up, at one point in the video comments, he brought up affirmative action. Particularly funny because he was assuming that I had a particular view on affirmative action. And in fact, it's a very complicated issue. And he cited some right-wing guy who was a black dude who was opposed to affirmative action. And it actually had some fairly good sources involved that he was drawing off, although his diatribes about Marxism suggested he comes from a particular framework, because I'm not a Marxist. And so that is simplifying. But anyway, one of the sources was really quite a good one. That went into a lot of the history of affirmative action and its effects on various demographic groups. And it had a wonderful quote that I put up then about the fact that the major variables weren't race. They had to do with social class. They had to do with economic income, the amount of debt load that you had to get into college. And that the difference between different demographic groups were there. And it was an important and relevant point, and I think it was a correct one. And so here I was actually of the material that was brought up in the video that Zane had brought up, and Zane wouldn't discuss. One that was at fault for being an idiot, and he keeps on calling me Jim Ron. He started calling me Sweetie for a while, and then he switched to Jim Ron. And my extent of my counterpunch is that I refer to him as Zany, Z-A-N-E-Y, because he's quite a zany little character. Anyway, we're about 15 minutes past the hour. Let me look to see what else we've got floating around in there. Someone, Fino, bringing up about drawing maps inaccurately, strangely shaped because they love the forms. They did it because the values reported did not always match up with reality. If we're talking about old style map making and a lot of the things about the concept of what you do when you make a map of something or you make a heuristic of something is really an important cognitive one. And the classic here is the great map of the London Underground. Accurate map at all, but it's a useful map. It rearranges all the lines so that you can use it functionally, because all you need to know when you're in the subway is what's the next station and what connects up with what line, what station do you get off to get from one line to another. And the map, therefore, is an accurate map for what information you need. And it's useful that I try to use that phrase map of time to refer to the third problem. I'll repeat this so everybody can go, because apparently everybody needs to have things repeated continuously. The four areas where people are screwing up generally, and creationism illustrates that. Number one, over-reliance on secondary sources they don't fact-check. 95% of anti-evolutionists don't cite primary sources. Two, extremely limited data set of the people who do pay attention to sources. In the anti-evolution case, there's only about 45 fact claimants in the entire anti-evolution movement. They're only paying attention to about 3,000 sources so far, which is only about 10% of the relevant data stream. And that's a big problem. Three, what do you think happened with the data? If you don't get to that stage, then you're useless. Are in that useless stage. I call it the map of time for the creationism issue, because it's, what do you think happened? This happened, then this happened, then this happened. And literally, creationist does map of time. Anybody do that? They have a vague idea of what they want to have been true, or more importantly, what they don't want. They don't want evolution. With creationists that have theoretically a very rigid flood geology in mind, they don't really think through, okay, look at that rock over there where I live. How did that get to be the way it is based on flood geology? No, they don't do that. 90% of the data to begin with, they can't create an accurate map of time, but they don't even try to do that. And that leads us to number four, the killer, which is what evidence would change their mind. And literally, that would do. They can't conceptualize information that would allow them to change their mind. And the transitional form example is the litmus test here, because if you ask any anti-evolutionist, okay, you don't like Archaeopteryx, you don't like Tiktaalik, you don't like fill in the blank, what would it need to look like to satisfy you about that? And you will never get them to think about it. That's the number four issue. So react to that.
Nope, they want to crack a squirrel.
Yeah, yeah. Even there, you know, the crocoduck is a useful illustration, because all you need to do, anybody who tries to discuss that, and if I ever run into Kirk Cameron, I'll ask him what paleontologist came up with that. Paleontologist came up with that, because that's exactly the opposite of what a intermediate should look like. That's something.
What's going to happen? He's going to go, well, but I found it on this website, and you go to the website and find it to be one of those mashup sites where everything on board is a product of Adobe Systems Incorporated. Not unlike this crocodile.
He's a secondary redactor. He bumps around secondary redactors. His set, Kirk Cameron bumps into Ray Comfort and Carl Kirby. That's where he got some of their material from. And they're just this incestuous little coffee clutch that's operating in that little niche area of creationism. They never fact check a damn thing. They don't think about a damn thing. They don't work out stuff on that. And so the more that
Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron would have to have brains first.
Oh no, they have brains. They just don't use them. They're sad ones. Sora Roarbeams just commented on the side on a completely unrelated subject that he liked the Orville. So did I. It was slow starting. The first episode was a little too leisurely for its own good, but eventually it kind of sunk in that what they're going to do are really good plots. This could be a perfectly classic Star Trek plot. Each one of the episodes that have popped up so far, but it's done tongue in cheek. It's done with humor. And I'm curious to see how it's going to be going on. That's going to be a fun one. The new Star Trek, they're going to actually show that at least once for free on CBS this Sunday. I'll catch that. I don't know whether or not it's only going to be in future on their pay channel, the online access, in which case I'm screwed. But I'll at least get to see the opening one. Paranormal thinks Cameron still has a banana up his ass. Yeah, well, I'm more polite. I just say they're Tortukans.
I'll be honest with
that's
you.
a word
If he does have one, if this is true, it in fact belongs to Ray Comfort.
Well,
In fact,
Comfort is.
There's a rumor running around that it may in fact be attached to Ray Comfort.
All of them are secondary redactors. That if you look at the once you taxonomize things in terms of who's the one copying arguments and who's the ones making them. Remember that, as I said, there's only about 45 people in anti-evolutionism who actually make fact claims. They're the core group. They cite the technical literature. 2/3 of them, about 30 some odd, are creationists, and the other third are the intelligent design movement. The ones in intelligent design, for all practical purposes, are the ones that post at Evolution News. That if a bomb blew them up, that would be the entire intelligent design movement right there. But the fact claimants in creationism are not the ones that are the public face typically. They're your Brian Thomases, they're your Jeffrey Tompkins, they're your Elizabeth Mitchells. They may pop up a little bit, but even like Georgia Purdom and others aren't really much in the fact claim department. They are basically redactors and snarky commenters, Bodie Hodge and all that bunch. Now, when you get down the food chain to a Ray Comfort or a Kent Hovind or a Ken Ham, now you're basically in the evangelical who channels aspects of creationism. Cheerspell just points in that that if they put Star Trek behind a paywall, we can organize hangout watch sessions. Well, maybe that's so. Yeah, if somebody got access to the thing, yeah. I've always liked all the Star Trek series. I'm more of a Trekker than I am a Star Wars-ish person, if only because Star Wars is basically mythic swashbucklers with lasers. And Star Trek actually kind of likes to make a bit more social commentary over the years, and it's had a little bit more thoughtfulness to it. But that's another whole subject for another subject matter. I must point out that
I am open to debate if you wish to discuss the Kessel Run.
yes. And how many parsecs there are on there? Yes, that's.
Well, you see, I understand that parsecs are distance, not time.
Yeah,
and what you don't realize
it's about 3 1/4 light years.
Yes,
and you know what it refers to.
If there's a black hole in the area, it's how close the Millennium Falcon is flying to the event horizon to skirt past it, thus shortening its travel distance.
At 6:30. You know what the definition?
Thus lengthening.
You know what the definition of a parsec is?
It's a distance. It's a distance.
It stands for the parallax of 1 second. Imagine using the Earth as a giant protractor, the Earth's orbit, and you look at a distant star and you measure where it comes on your map. And you wait for the Earth to go all the way around to the other side of its orbit, which is 180 million miles, and observe the same star. If the angle that it makes to that is 1 second of arc, parsec away, which is 3 1/4 light years. So it's a parallax of 1 second.
And the closest thing we have to that is 760 milliarc seconds in the case of Alpha Centauri.
Yeah, because you've got it's 4 1/2 light years away, and put that into perspective too. I once worked out a little thought bubble to give a sense of it. I live in Spokane, Washington. Seattle is about 280 miles away, or 400 kilometers, whichever you prefer. So that can give you a ballpark. Now, if you imagine our solar system, 1/2-inch marble in the middle of a football field here in Spokane, that's roughly the right perspective. And Pluto and Neptune and stuff are orbiting roughly out where the goalposts are. With the sun in the middle, and all of the planets that we know and love, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and all that, are in like the first 3 feet or so, meter or so away from the marble. With the naked eye would be the little dust grain that represents Saturn and Jupiter and all that bunch. Now, that football field, if you imagine, is a 3-marble football field complex in Seattle. That gives you some sense of the amount of space separating just our nearest stars. Now, when you get down into the center of the galaxy, the star density goes up substantially. And I think that, as memory serves me, stars around the center of the galaxy will be, at times only billions of miles apart. They're much closer together than what we're used to out in the low rent neighborhood out here in the spiral arms. But out here, you realize that that's why when two galaxies collide, as our galaxy will eventually with Andromeda in another couple of million years, the odds of any individual star bumping into any other individual star during that process is really remote, because they're going to be passing through all of that space in between that you don't really realize because of how tenuous everything is. So just to end on a quote from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, space is big. It's really big. It's really, really big. You may think it's a long way down to the corner drugstore or chemist, but it's nothing compared to space, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that was always one of my favorites.
I never read the books. I saw the TV version, which I still love the most. The movie version is kind of clumsily done and is not as good as the TV version, even though it's got better special effects. And I've heard bits of the audio version, where I think they changed one of the actors. I think the guy that played Arthur Dent was different in the series, but they did a few little minor adjustments. Most of the cast they kept over from the radio series, which is much longer. I think it ran like about 12 hours or so. They were all half-hour episodes, if memory serves me. And then the TV series was about 6 hours long, and managed to get an awful lot in, and was very droll and clever. And then the movie was basically shrunk down a bit too much, although he had done the script for it. So I mean, it was his baby, but I think it had to truncate a bit too much. It's got some moments in it.
Do yourself and me both a favor. Read those books. They're really not expensive.
I know, but boy, do I have a lot of time on my hands that I have to fill with things I have to do. So it maybe in my dim and distant old age, if I can manage to reach there, have to get to it.
You know what?
I'll toss in on the matter of.
I am strongly tempted to just go grab copies of the go find PDF copies of these books and send them to you.
Oh, I know, but I can guarantee you I will not have time to get around to reading them, because at the moment, tip research is a full-time operation that I get away from only at my peril. I discovered that in the hiatus years when I piled up so much information. That the data stream that I have to keep tabs on in order to keep up with what creationists do and what the data stream is huge. And hopefully more people will support the project.
There, dude.
I can get to the point where I could even print up all of the backlog that I have in my pending files that I can't print up because I ran out of ink and can't afford to buy ink to get to. That's the other matter of it. So if you think my project is worthwhile, people know about it and support it if you can, but at the very least, make use of it, because there's a lot of stuff. I know the old PDFs that are written in the old book format with the footnote references, and that is not the way we're used to doing with stuff now, but nevertheless, there's a lot of stuff there. And I cover a lot of issues that, you don't need to reinvent the wheel on, and it can also springboard off of other issues since then. So make use of it. Pick my brain. Use me. I'm here while I'm still here.
And actually, RJ, don't feel too bad. I come from the same sort of background you do as far as footnotes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite as old, but I still remember all of that stuff from the 70s and 80s.
A discretionary footnote, a digressionary footnote now would just work nice as a hyperlink, a sidebar. And so in theory, if I can ever keep at it long enough to be able to upgrade the tip website to be able to have much more interactivity, and for that, it may eventually reach the point where I'll have to have something where I'm going to have to actually have money to do that, in which case, hint, hint. At the moment, it's all kind of volunteer work, and even the web hosting is done free. Dear friend Alex is a truck driver, recently got married. He has his own web server. Posted the tip website on that free for me all of these years, and bless his heart, he's absolutely wonderful on that. So I've been depending on the kindness of strangers on that. But in the printing department, it's way more difficult when I'm in ink. The principle is that, say, when I do a data sweep, I'll print up the abstract of the text or the first page of it if it's a PDF that I have access to, and then I figure out what section of the work it goes to, and I plop them down onto the stacks of pending material so that when I get to that section, I'll be able to get to the first one that deals with it. But I can't do that So Barney Tearspell says, I'm a web developer, need help, holler, I'll donate work. Okay, this is an open thing, but who cares? I will give you my email address, and you can make a contact with me there, and we can figure out how to contact on stuff. At the moment, I'm trying to upgrade the website so that it can get more interactivity.
You do realize that's not exactly difficult, RJ.
Probably not, but I'm an old fart. When I get used to, I'm amazed that I've got as far as I can. I'm doing the kind of video linking that was unbelievable back when I was growing up. This was the stuff you saw in science fiction movies. And now here I am communicating with people all over the world and all this kind of stuff. But I want to do better and more. I want all the information that I've got so far much more accessible. I want to be able to have people search the site. I want to be able to click on sources and go to those. That's all a huge amount of work, because remember, I've amassed a way bigger data set than everybody is used to. People, if you download my bibliography, for God's sakes, don't print it, because it's 2,500 pages long. It involves 50,000 sources. And there are tens of thousands of technical sources in there. There's over 8,000 anti-evolution sources in there. It's a huge field that nobody really has ever gotten into that level of depth before, or have the ability to pull it all together before. Not even the NCSE. I think they keep all of their stuff in boxes, and so they're not able to access the material. Whereas I've already been able to show that even with the clumsy system I've got so far, I'm able to respond fairly real time on a lot of technical issues by the ability to poke up material that I've already studied in the older tip, or material in the bibliography where I've got references that I can yank in and then boop, drop a relevant source material. I think I've on poor U. Ross, who used to tweet a lot his biology subjects, but every time he did, I would give a technical paper that's on the evolutionary origin of that. Been doing that less and less and less over the time that I've been noticing. He hasn't blocked me or anything, and supposedly he invited me to be on his show at some point in October or later. I haven't heard back from him on it, but we'll find out whether that turns out to be the case. It might be like the Huffman debate, part 2 never comes. At 8:06, I'm going on again and again on stuff. I got to get prepped, because I wish I could be able to stop by and see you over there in the coast during my weekend, but I think it's going to be too much of a crunch for my stuff, because I'm going to be there for birthday things and things are running amok, and so I'll probably have to skip that. But there will come time in the future that
if you need
I may be able to do so.
And getting everything else sorted out, let me know.
Yeah, well, tell everybody who can hear my voice.
It's the one thing I can do. It's organize large amounts of information. That probably help.
Well, the spreadsheet has worked out very effectively. It's effectively what Darwin was doing with his filing boxes in his day, because he realized that they reached a point where how does he find information? That to manage the kind of stuff that I was doing, I needed to have a way of mapping all of that stuff, and so I started the spreadsheet thing, which I had now access to because I had better computers. This was back in 2009, and then it grew and grew and grew, and I realized now, oh, wait a minute, I can count how many sources are cited, and I can count whether anti-evolutionists have cited them or not, and I can keep track of all of this relatively easy by pasting things from one spreadsheet to another, and then the formulas will automatically calculate everything for me. So I was able to reach levels of analysis in the meta stage that I wouldn't be able to do before, and nobody has ever measured before. So I don't have to guess at the 45 people that are the fact claimants. I don't have to guess at what works have been cited by anti-evolutionists. I'm counting them.
Hey, James,
this is yeah.
Have you ever considered doing a TED Talks?
I would be delighted to do a TED Talk.
As crappy as TED Talks might be to some people's opinions, to get you on stage for 15 minutes and basically explain how this all breaks down to what'd you say? 45 authors?
You let them know about me, because otherwise it's going to sound like I'm Mr. Intelligent Design Edgar pushing his own wares. So if somebody wants to do that on my behalf, I urge you to do so. I am always happy to do. I'm always wanting to do.
You said you're on the West Coast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Spokane, Washington, Pacific time.
They do a TED Talks in, I believe, Vancouver, BC, in Canada. So it wouldn't be that far from you.
There, I'd have to get a damn passport. But maybe something can be done by some venue down in here, because I said I'm within driving distance of Seattle. We've got local PBS station here that could theoretically do some stuff if they had a workout. There's various things that do Skypes. I don't know, but I bid you up on that and keep in touch. You have my email?
I can find it somewhere.
Well, I put it up. I put it up in there for everybody to see. And the same reason where people keep on asking me, would you like to debate? And I go, hell yeah, I've been saying that for years. But too many people will offer, and happens. And so I go, what can I do? I'd love to have debated Casey Luskin. I'd love to have debated Steve Meyer and anybody else on the scene. And I'm still open to debating Kent Hovind. There we go. The one that I wouldn't debate was Edgar. He wanted to have a discussion with me over and over again, and I'd already heard how he talked, and the guy's a nitwit, and so he's a complete waste of time. And I was perfectly happy that Aaron Raw do it and let him take the brunt.
I would love to see you debate Ken Hovind, but not actually debate him. Just whenever he says something,
have a conversation.
Show him how his source.
You need to have a conversation.
Comes from, and see how that trips him up.
And ask source methods questions.
Here's a fun one for you. King Crocoduck has been working over Kent for a little while now, and he doesn't seem to be getting anywhere, and I know why, and that's because Kent doesn't have the foggiest idea what he's talking about on any sort of level that King Crocoduck is capable of. What we need to do is engage you directly on the subject of evolution, rather than trying to deal with cosmology. Because
Crocoduck is coming from a physics background, and often they're loggerheads, because Hovind, to borrow a phrase from, you may or may not have remembered somebody called, oh God, and suddenly brain fart, Fred Allen. That he was saying about you could put all the sincerity in Hollywood in a gnat's navel and have room left over for 3 caraway seeds in an agent's heart. Well, that also would be an accurate description of Kent Hovind's understanding of any science topic whatsoever. And when you know that he's channeling old creationism material, not usually new creationism material, and has a really clumsy idea about almost all of the genetics and the biology. This guy is not up on Evo Devo and homeobox genes. If you know his background, you can theoretically poke holes in things just by knowing the right strategic question to ask.
Well, I could take Kent Hovind apart in 5 minutes. That's not an issue. I just have to have a chance to talk. Okay, and I have very little in terms of actual education on the subject, which should tell you something.
Well, anyway, we're at 6:37, and my perpetual thing of stopping. We're already a half hour overtime. I will actually stop the broadcast now. Thanks everybody for involving in this, and I love having the feedback inside the room as well as outside the room. And hopefully, we'll come up with an equally interesting subject on Evolution Hour 18 next week. Alas, I will not be able to bump into Strike's movie night this Friday because of prior commitments, but they'll have to fend for themselves.
No fun.